Hi, today I'm talking with Mike Hogan. We talked about different feedback loops of writing software and the one for writing novels, making 3 good interventions per day, and reminding people about the good things that they already know.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello everyone, and hello Mike. I have Mike Hogan. Is that how to pronounce it?
That's right, Mike Hogan. Yeah, you got it.
So that's I stopped asking it before, and I start asking it during the interviews because I think it's always interesting for people. What's a typical way that I might pronounce it and that others might do? So that's another thing that we might learn from each other. And I'm in Belgium, and I'm going to try to show the location. Oops, I've did something wrong here. Where is the location? I'm here in Belgium, and if I'm doing this correctly, and I'm not, I started playing with tools, and that's never smart.
Hmm.
Just before, but here I am, and Mike, you're in London somewhere, and Google is
Oh,
helping us out to go to the location and to show us more or less where you are. And like I already said multiple times on the show, the goal is not to do an exact location. The goal is not to help stalkers, of course. And I'm here in Belgium, and it's 12:39 on a nice sunny Sunday. And what's the time on your side, Mike?
it's 11:39. It's not
11.
super sunny. It's kind of windy and overcast. It's a typical British day, even for July.
Even for July. Well, actually, in Belgium, we kind of have a lot of the British weather as well, but for today, it's rather sunny. And I think in much parts of Europe, we have a lot of
Mm.
sun the last few days, I would say. Even though we did have a small, what is it, rash of rain yesterday, but it was like 15 minutes or something, and then it was gone as well. I would jump right into that. A little bit of background. Mike, for the people that don't know you, could you tell us a little more? Who are you?
Certainly, yeah. So I was born in Ireland, right in the centre of Ireland. If you draw a line from Dublin to Galway, it's about halfway over. And I became a geek at 10 years old, despite the fact that I was born on a farm, right? And there's a lot of farm work happening. I just remember the town I was from was really small, man. It's about 2,000 people, but there was an electronic
Wow.
shop, one electronic shop in town, and they
And
got
that's the only shop that got you interested. Is that
right. So yes, it was called Rex Electronics, and they've got an Amstrad CPC 464, and it had green and red and black buttons. And we were all stuck to the window coming home from school one day, like children at a candy store. Oh, I want to get one of those. Um, and I think that was probably when I was 11 or 12. But I'd started programming when I was 10, even though I didn't have a computer. I managed to get books from the library, and I started writing programs out on paper, imagining how they might work
wow?
in a real machine. And I was saving up, my mum was saving up to buy a computer for me. So I had stacks of printouts ready to program in when I got my first computer. And then I got my first computer at 12 and started typing in all these programs, and none of them worked. So I guess that was my first lesson in how important feedback is and iteration in
A feedback
yeah,
loop of 2 years is way too long.
on paper from a book in the library. Yeah, it was crazy. So the first computer I got was a Commodore 128. I didn't get the Amstrad. I think things had moved on a little bit. Commodore 128, and then I got an Amiga, and I programmed a lot. My dad wanted me out working on the farm, but I was programming a lot, so there was a tension going on there between what I was going to do in the future because I quite liked farming. And then I sold my first piece of software when I was 15 to
Wow.
a guy up the road who he used to grow trees, and he wanted an inventory system for his trees. So I built something for him and showed it to him every Saturday, and he eventually paid me 50 Irish pounds for it in 15. I would have been that would have been 1987, I think. And I've been chasing that high ever since, Steve. That thing of of giving a piece of software to somebody where it makes a difference to their life, and it's personal. It's it's there's a direct connection between me and the consumer of what I produce, and it felt almost like giving somebody warm bread. That there's a real humane connection in giving something digital that helps them, because that was my specialty, and he was a guy who grew trees. And I think that was what decided me then that I wanted to do that as a career.
So even if that was, well, for you as a teenager, it was probably a lot of money, but even there, it was not a lot of money that he paid you, although it made probably a big difference, and it saved him a lot more money than he paid you. If I look at that.
Absolutely. Yes, I didn't really pay much, like you say, I didn't pay much attention to the economics of it. I enjoyed that interaction. And then, like I say, my career has been about that ever since. So I went and I did computer engineering in Limerick, kind of the southwest of Ireland. And computer engineering is 50% hardware and 50% software. But I preferred the software. I found hardware harder to do for some reason. The intellectual purity of software appealed to me more, and the fact that there was really good inspection tools. I couldn't map that to hardware as much. So I specialized in software. And I started working professionally in '94, and I've been getting more addicted to it ever since.
And then you discovered that there's another 50%, and that's the people that are around it and something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's interesting, starting in '94 when everything was waterfall. There wasn't really good conversations about how developers test. Everything was done on C++ and on Solaris machines, if I remember. And being through the whole XP, Lean, Agile, it makes me understand what it was like before that. So I've got a real appreciation for what those types of things offer now. And I think that maybe, being younger, people who start when these things already exist, they don't understand what it's like when you don't have it.
That's definitely something I see in a lot of younger developers. Than they kind of think that Scrum is very heavyweight with a lot of meetings, and I think like, yeah, but you should have seen what we had before.
Absolutely, yeah.
And at the same time, I sometimes feel that, of course, if depending on how it's implemented, if you add Scrum on top of a lot of other things, then it feels heavyweight. But if you just replace it, it's very much more lightweight than whatever was before. At least that it was for me, and when I don't know, 2004, 2005 started with some of these things. Yeah. And we jumped right into a lot of these things already. What's a background? So I want to go to that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Yves, I found your questions unusually challenging, right? Because they're not, if I saw a podcast about agile, I would think, oh, people are talking about Scrum and Kanban and different techniques, but yours are very much about the individual. And it's bizarre. I'm not something I give myself a lot of thought about. So these have challenged me, these questions, maybe more than others. So something that has influenced me that not many people know about. Most people know, there's very few things about me that almost nobody would know. But I guess the influence that the fewest know, like maybe my wife and a couple of good friends. I went to work in California for an Irish startup in the late 90s. And I was in a very introspective period in my life. I was doing a lot of reading about psychology and how to understand yourself. And I was quite intellectual and self-analytical. And I somehow believed that if I pursued relentlessly the truth of questioning as to who I was, I would get to some objective truth, and that would bring me peace. That would bring me peace. So I invented this technique when I moved into my flat in California. I had a lot of spare time because I was in a new environment. I didn't have a lot of friends. So I invented this technique I got two A3 sheets that ended up being more than two. But my line of reasoning was that I would write what I thought was the truest statement about myself in the center of the sheet. And I would draw a ring around that. And then I would draw a line from that ring with a question trying to penetrate into the truth of that would yield another ring, and that this like unrelenting, systematic approach of questioning would ultimately bring me to the truth of who and what I am. So it started with.
And you were what age around that time?
27, maybe 28, I think.
Very young for doing such deep work, I would say.
Yeah, it's always been there. I think a part of the reason I left Ireland to go abroad, I think, was to try to get that break, to find out who and what am I. So I can't remember what was in all the circles and what was on all the arrows, but let's say it was something like the truest thing I could start with. The starting point would be something like, I am Mike and I'm a human being. And then the arrow would be like, what does that mean? And then I would try to answer that in a box. And then that would go on and on and on. And after the space, and then every time I did that, I'd give myself a few hours to think it over, or my subconscious would be working on it. And then I'd come back to the sheet again and try and extend it. And it got to the point after, I can't remember, a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, that I had 2 A sheets full of circles and full of lines. And this thing was going nowhere. And then it hit me, somebody can give you a piece of information and you think that's great. But when a realization is different to a piece of information, it's a deeply understood internal truth. I realized then that the answer to whatever I was pursuing was not in information. There wasn't a piece of a jigsaw, a metaphysical jigsaw, that could be provided to me or found in me that would slot in, and then I'd know all the answers and I'd be at peace. So I tore up the sheets and threw them in the bin, and it was incredibly liberating, and almost a small religious experience. That there was a big opening, a big realization that what you're looking for, Mike, is not in information. Even though you're a computer programmer, even though you're like love mathematics, you love science, that's not all of it. There's more to it than that. And so that was in the first couple of months of my time in California. And then towards the end of my time in California, when the company went bankrupt, right, it was in the whole .com build up, and we were burning 3 million a month with no income.
Wow.
But even with this, Goldman Sachs valued us at 120 million. Bizarre stuff, bizarre times, really. So after 33 million, 11 months, we ran out of money and our backer pulled out, and my visa was contingent on this company existing in the US.
So you had to return.
I was told I had to leave the country within 10 days. And I didn't want to. I didn't feel like my Californian experiment was over. I wanted to try to live there a little bit longer. And this was the first time anything significantly wrong happened in my life. Like everything, I'd been on rails up until then. Like, so school went well, university went well, I got good employment. The system took care of me. So I never really saw the system. And here I was then contemplating being an illegal alien in America.
Because you stayed longer than the 10 days, of course.
I ended up staying longer than the 10 days. And I got paranoid about the police, because I'd been this sort of Boy Scout, and I'd never broken any rule. Are the police going to come and get me? Are the border force going to come and get me? What will happen? Will I go to jail? And this was pondering, it was turning over and getting quite intense. And not dissimilar to the realization when I tore up the A3 sheets. At one point, this got so intense that the whole thing just burst open. And again, a mini religious experience. So California was good to me in a lot of ways. I had a realization that these are all abstractions. What happened was I saw myself sitting above the planet and floating across the planet and seeing the piece of territory that is called America, and realizing that America doesn't exist as a real thing. It's an abstraction that we have named. Borders don't exist as a real thing. If the police come to deport me, it's because they believe in abstractions, but they have no truth in and of themselves. And this was, if the previous one was a little religious experience, this one was more profound and last longer. And all this stuff started spewing out of me.
It almost sounds like you invented the Matrix, the movie, because it sounds a little bit like these same similar kind of abstractions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
the
movie. But,
yes, not at all dissimilar. And that, I can't remember what color the pill is to make you see the abstractions in the Matrix, but whatever that pill is it blue or red? I'm not sure.
I keep forgetting, because some people prefer this one and the other, so I keep forgetting. Indeed.
Yeah. So through this, through this sort of relentless obsession about, how I was going against the system and breaking the law, and why was the system was unfair, the system collapsed in my head, and I just saw what I thought was an unadorned continuity of reality, and abstractions were just things that we project onto reality. And then I remember taking a walk later, and my mind just said, "Oh, look at the grass is green." And it even went to the extent that that's not grass and it's not green, it's just what we call it to be. So that then opened. Subsequently in my life, I found Buddhism and meditation, but I think that was where that started. That there was two shifts in that period, from a very empirical, logical type of person to a much more expansive, open type of person that was less consumed by obsessive thinking, and massively liberating. So yeah, not too many people know that to the level of detail that I've got into. Yeah, but it's been a massive influence in my life.
Yeah, it also sounds a little bit, if you in the agile world, we like to talk about growth mindset, and it almost feels that first one you want to grow, but at the same time you kept into that very detailed describing it and writing it, where once you threw it away, you're much more free to grow in whatever kind of things, and not defined by what was in the box or what was written down.
That's very true. That's very true, Eve. And what I've found subsequent to getting involved in Buddhism is that there are schools of Buddhism that use koans to bring you to these kind of mini breakthroughs. So the koan is this. This might not be me explaining it perfectly, but a koan is an unanswerable question, like that. It defeats logic, but you're told to obsess about it to the point, like they say, obsess about it so that it's like a hot ball in your throat, and then eventually the obsessive thinking mind just capitulates, and you go into a different form of understanding. It's the release of that obsession is a form of insight, and it brings you to greater freedom. So that I think is what I took myself to by turning the obsession about the police into a koan, and turning the obsession about what's true about me into a form of koan. And that sounds very
And that's
spiritual.
at the very early age of less than 30 years old, or almost 30 years old, I
Right,
would say.
right,
So
yeah.
that, and I want to move a little bit back to you. You said you moved from Ireland to the United States. If I remember correctly, and this is why I'm asking the question, I think at the end of the 90s, Ireland had a lot of unemployment, and a lot of people wanted to move to America. Or was that earlier? I don't know. I know there was some phase, but I don't know when what that was.
That would have been earlier, maybe that maybe even a previous generation. I think in the 90s and into the noughties, Ireland did extremely well in the digital space. There were a number of startups in Dublin that did really well on IPOs, and there was a real buzz in the software industry in Ireland. We were in fact an Irish startup looking to get established in America, which is why we went to set up a Californian office. And we had big ambitions, and that was not uncommon at the time.
Yeah, I do remember that Ireland. I think even now there's a lot of companies that had big parts in Ireland where software was released from there, but I just didn't know when that started, because I do remember seeing some some documentaries about the unemployment in Ireland, and something.
Yeah, in the 80s it was really bad, but from the 90s onwards, it's been, even to now, it's doing really well.
I'm bringing it up because this is, for me also, this is things where you see that things have lows and ups, and people feel like, okay, economy is really bad. Well, I think Ireland is one of the examples, but it was really bad at some point and then moved on to becoming much better. I think also due to politics that invited companies to have lower taxes and whatever, that might be good or bad. So I don't want to go too much into that, but at least it worked to create a better economy at some point. So that kind of helped as well. And it's always interesting because there's a lot of movies and music and whatever about people moving from Ireland to America. It seems that America has been the country that every Ireland person, or a lot of Irish people, want to go to. I think in Europe in general, but I think Irish is even more known for going to America, I think.
That's absolutely right. That's right. So back, in the 1840s, when the famine hit, I think there was like a million people or more went and left to the US, and it has been sort of a destination, either US or UK, for people
Mm.
looking for a better life and trying to find work. Yeah. So I think a lot of people in the US say that they have Irish ancestry. So yeah, we got around. We got around, Eve. Yeah.
You got around, but it's nice, and so in the end, because I want to finish that story or close that story. How did you move to back? Because you were illegal into the USA. How is that even then possible to come back? Can you just board a plane, or how does that work? Because you don't have the
Yeah.
papers.
That's a good point. Nothing happened there. I did spend time, like maybe a month or so, trying to find employment in the US, but they were like halving my salary in return for getting me a new visa, and I just thought that was too exploitative. And I said, look, I've got a passport that gets me into 28 countries. Let me just pick one. So I picked Finland. I went onto this contracting website and I saw that Nokia in Finland were advertising, so I said I'll go there. Um, got the job over the phone, and then I had to drive to Vegas to sell my car to a guy in Vegas. Then I got a flight back to LA, and then flew out the next morning, and that was the end of the US. It never
And
even crossed my mind that I might be held up that anything might happen at the border. That's how collapsed. That's how free I was. I'd gotten to the point where if I saw a police car when I was going for lunch or something, oh, are they looking for me? To the point where I'll just cruise to the airport without even a single worry.
But of course, probably from their point of view, okay, it's illegal, but you're getting out of the country, so you will never be able to get in. So for them, probably they're kind of happy. Maybe there are some rules, but you didn't know, you didn't check at that time.
Didn't check, and that's interesting. I haven't attempted to go back since. Me and my wife are talking about doing it next year, so we'll see what happens, But they're only abstractions, Eve. It's fine.
Yeah, it's probably like that. Okay, let's move to that next question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you? Was there something decent? Because you already talked a little bit about being on the farm. So your father at least was kind of maybe not pushing, but at least he would have been happy if you go there. Was there anything else that was?
Yeah, yeah. There was a few flames burning, I think, when I was younger. I liked farming. It's a super difficult job, and it hasn't gotten any easier since. And I think maybe at the age of 15, farming started to lose its shine for me. But I was big into sports when I was younger, and I got injured a couple of times, and then I was going under a physiotherapy, and I thought, oh, this seems like maybe it could be a nice job. So I considered physiotherapy for a while, and I did some in our secondary school. We had a work placement, so I did a week or a week and a half in the hospital on a physiotherapy ward to try to.
Wow,
Um,
at that age, you already have that opportunity to try out jobs.
at
That's
16,
interesting.
I think it's unusual in that school. I don't think it's common across the whole of Ireland that this school and a few schools like it did this, where I did two small work experiences. I did a PE teacher for a little while, and a physical education teacher, and physiotherapy in the same 2 week period, and that was quite revealing because the glamour of sports physiotherapy is very different to the reality of remedial physiotherapy that's in hospitals, right? So the first job that I had was with a stroke patient who couldn't breathe very well, and I had to massage that person to try to breathe. It's gone. Oh, this is not fixing Olympic athletes. If I could fix Olympic athletes, this would be a brilliant job. But you don't just start there. And then when I was quite young, I wanted to be an astronaut, but I found out that Ireland doesn't have a space program, so that
But
kind of
even
went.
there, just talking about the same thing, the glamour of being an astronaut is, of course, when you go to space and to the moon. But there is a whole trajectory before of a lot of hard work.
Yeah,
Even there, being in space, I think these people have completely no control over their time. It's completely, I don't know, I've never been to space, but I can imagine that it's a lot less glamorous than usually what we see on television or in movies and everything like that. And I think just at the age of 16, already understanding that, okay, there is a public idea about a job, and then reality that's actually a lot less glamorous is interesting to have as an experience, wouldn't you say?
Oh, so valuable, so valuable. Like it really, it chopped off things that I was exploring with, and quickly got me to what I still love doing today, which is extraordinary. So wow, the teachers, you just got so much thanks. I did actually ring my maths teacher about 10 years ago, and I said, look, I just got to thank you for teachers don't get a lot of thanks, especially from people who are, at the time I was in my 40s. So I got to thank you for what you've done. It's such a sacrifice and such a thankless task when you're trying to control a room of crazy 16-year-olds, and the last thing they want to do is listen to you, but what you're telling them is possibly the most important thing. So, maybe I should do more of that. Actually, I'm going to Ireland in August, and it'd be nice to meet some of the teachers again and thank them. But the other thing, Eve, that I played around with was writing. Preceding this period of introspection at 27, I think what led up to that was a lot of writing, writing fiction and writing stories and trying to find myself in creating characters, which is kind of a bizarre thing to try to do. But I did that quite intently for 4 or 5 years, and I thought that maybe this could be a career. But it doesn't pay that as well as software. And actually, I found a lot of parallels between software and writing fiction, that you're trying to distill an idea down to its essence in a way, by weaving a narrative that makes the thing coherent and work, so to speak. So like an essay is like a program that works in the person's brain. So I found a lot of similarities. I actually think software is more a linguistic activity than a mathematical activity, unless you're working for algorithmic companies. But to answer your question,
it's a very interesting sub remark. But indeed, a lot of the things that we focus when we go to IT is we learn about algorithms and everything, but that's just a very tiny little fraction that probably today not many developers still do, because we have
no.
libraries that can solve a lot of these kind of things. And again, it's focusing on something, and for some people that's interesting. But yeah, programming life is big difference than a lot of other things. It's also interesting that you compare, for me, the writing of software and the writing of fiction, in a sense that in software we have the advantages that we can write tests that our software is doing what we want to do. In fiction, you come up with an idea, and then people think all different kind of sub stories that you didn't write. That's interesting, but yeah, you need to, how do you say it? You need to make sure that all the dots connect. In software, if the dots don't connect, either your software doesn't compile, it doesn't work. You can write tests, but if you write a fiction and there are some dots that are not connecting because, I don't know, you worked for 5 years on something, that might be hard to catch, I think.
It's very true, and this is the big distinction that I found between software development and essays or fiction, was that feedback loop. So I wasn't able to test this incrementally with people's minds to see, am I heading towards a useful piece of fiction here? That you write it and redraft it and maybe get a couple of editors to review it or some friends to review it, and then you throw it out as the 1.0 release, and there's never a 1.1. And it can take 6 months to produce a decent essay, and then nobody might care. So I found it less rewarding than software. But to answer your question, right, that these are all preliminary things that I did in my teens and in my 20s. But subsequent to that, if things had turned out differently with a lot of different circumstances, I could have ended up being a meditation teacher, because it's become such an important part of my life. Subsequent to those, like soon after those events in California, I found myself on a meditative path, and it's been a pillar of my life ever since. And I have run meditation. I used to run a meditation group. I've given meditation classes. That's petered out a little bit now. But if software wasn't the core activity, I think maybe that would have been.
And when you work with teams and things like that, is that something that you sometimes do to I don't know, release tension in a team or in a group of people, or is that a separate kind of activity?
It's a separate activity, but it informs me a lot of what I do, right? So I never tell people that I'm a meditator unless it comes up in conversation, and then when it does, sometimes people ask, "Can you teach me?" And I do. But I never put it on people. I will go with people on the journey where they want to go to. But it's still a very useful tool for me to keep my mind as clean as I possibly can, so that when I approach an engagement with a team, I can just serve them rather than bringing my own confusion to it. Now, it's not perfect, honestly, it's not. Like, it's just, my meditation is not that advanced, but I do my best.
Yeah, but I really like the way you put it about not adding your own interpretation to other people's, because indeed it's very hard sometimes. We hear somebody saying, and I think I'm a very fast thinker, so I think then in one direction, and in I don't know X% of the time I'm right, but in the moments that I'm wrong, that's actually very hurtful.
Right.
So it's very dangerous to do that too much.
That's interesting, Eve, because I think I'm a really slow thinker.
Mm.
I don't think I ever have an answer to anything until a couple of days afterwards, which almost feels like when I'm in a leadership position, I tend to lead from behind, if you know what I mean. In that, I let the team do whatever they think is right, and I'm kind of trying to absorb what's happening here, and then wake up the next morning with, well, maybe this is the right way to regroup. So it's an unusual way to lead, but that's just my style.
It's a way that I would say I've learned to do much more, but usually my mind is already much further in all kinds of directions, and I'm trying to write down and try to not oppose it, because I've learned that usually it doesn't help, and indeed if you're in a leadership position, everybody thinks of you to take that role, and I'm like, no, that's probably not the best thing. Even if I have the best answers, if nobody follows me, that doesn't work. I much prefer that people try to stumble, and of course, if they're going to run into a cliff or into a wall, I will stop people from getting hurt. That's the other kind of thing. But others, it's more like asking questions to make sure I understand correctly before I answer something. And it's depending on the role, because sometimes or I think both of us, we are hired to solve a problem or to do something, and then people expect an answer in the first 5 minutes or the first 5 hours. And nah, that's not going to do, because even if I have a good answer, give me a day or two extra and I will have a better answer, and maybe you will have found the answer yourself. So it's
fully, that resonates quite a bit.
But it's important indeed to have that understanding about slow and fast thinking about, okay, what is good or bad. So that's why I wanted to go a little bit into that kind of thing. So I interrupted you. I'm not sure if there was still something you wanted to add to this question, or you can want to go to the next one.
No, I think that's it. I think I would possibly be a meditation teacher if things had happened differently.
I'm always amazed when I ask this question. And like you said earlier on, indeed, these are not that easy questions, but I'm always amazed that many people have multiple kind of things. And the former part, this part, meditation is like all, for me in this case, it's all very, very different. And with the whole explanation, it feels also very, very logical. So, and this is why I like to ask this question. Like I said, I have children 20, 18, and 15. So they're in the middle of thinking about their life, what I'm going to do. And sometimes they have the idea, oh, I have to make a decision, and then the rest of my life I will do that. And it's like, no, this is not how it's working for most people.
Absolutely
like
true.
you had so many different careers, and I think that we're living in a world where we have a lot less of this. And I think my parents did like a few jobs that were more or less in the same direction. You're a nice example of multiple kind of things where it could have moved on. In different kind of things, and I think a lot of us, we have that. So thanks for sharing that whole story, because it makes it very interesting on where we are. I want to move, or let's move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest challenge, and of course the biggest challenge that you want to have out on the open on the internet?
Again, a challenging question, Eve. And I suppose based on what I've said up until now, you won't be surprised when I say that my biggest challenge, I think, is my mind. And that I think that this was probably the truth for everyone, because, when I was ruminating over this question, I said, well, this thing could be a challenge and that thing could be a challenge. But There's a metaphor in Buddhism that for every 1,000 people pulling leaves off the tree of ignorance, there's one person hacking at the root of the tree. And what that means is that the root of all issues is the mind. So the journey I've been on since my late 20s to now that's where it is. So I'll give you some examples of, and this will resonate, I'm sure, for you and everyone. That there are times when I think that I'm second rate, and anything I have to say about software development, agile methods, meditation, have been said by others in better ways before, and that there's nothing original that I've got to say because it's all in books, and all the luminaries have expressed it brilliantly, and all I'm doing is empty parroting of what they've had to say. So that mind activity is happening. There's other times the mind activity is the opposite, and I think I'm brilliant, and something good has come out, and then I'm God's gift to software development. Then there are times when
Can I answer or reply a little bit to that first part? It reminds me of a conversation, and I'm not sure where I heard it, but something similar that Gitte Klitgard said at some point, and that I think she got a reply from Esther that says, yes, but sometimes people want to hear it from you. So it could be true that you didn't invent anything or whatever, but sometimes people need to hear it from someone else in a different conversation. And let's all face, well, a lot of you talked about the early XP. These are things 20 years ago, but at the same time, it's like a lot of people don't know it anymore, and we need to repeat it, and we need to make sure that people know about these things, why we're doing it. So even if it's said, even if that would be true, and I think it's not fully true, but even if that would be 100% true, it still is important that we repeat these kind of messages, won't you say?
I totally agree, Eve. Like, so the picture I'm trying to paint here is that the mind can go to extremes, and the challenge is to act through the middle of all of that, right? That's what I'm trying to get. So even though, like, constantly in stand-up, this, everybody knows this, design solution stuff, conversation starts happening. And then I leave that run for a while, and then I say, folks, can we take this offline? So that is something that's been said a billion times in stand-ups before. So I'm not doing anything novel there, but I just have to do it, even though my mind is going, oh, hang on, Mike, should you say this right now? So there's continuous doubt in my mind because, this is, I have a really good meditator friend, and the meditator friend says something similar, like that the mind is everyone's biggest challenge. And he said, imagine sitting on a bus beside somebody that spoke continuously on the journey, the way your mind just keeps talking, right?
Oh, that's such a good mental image, because indeed it would drive me crazy, and at the same time I know I'm driving myself crazy doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes there's imposter syndrome or doubt, or it's always there, and sometimes there's elation and ego, right? So you got to get a clear line through that. And then there's frustration. I get frustrated a lot, right? Because I enjoy software from the age of 15. I know what can be done when there's an unencumbered, empowered team on a mission. It's one of the funnest things you could possibly do. But I'm a software consultant, so I'm typically engaged in large enterprises where there are untold obstacles, and I get extremely frustrated. If all of this could be swept away, we would have 10 times more than you folks could imagine done in 6 months. So then rage comes with less people, and and everybody would enjoy it, and frustration comes. So I have to work with frustration. So that's the challenge, right? That all of that is going on, and I need to keep showing up, keep staying steady through that sort of mental fire and mental maelstrom. And yeah, I think that's common for everyone, but to identify it as the main challenge, I think, is an important step.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, because I think indeed with many people we have these kind of things, and the example of the stand-up is very clear. It's like, do I still need to say it? Well, sometimes we need to be the one giving the example, giving also the permission to other people to say that kind of thing, because I think we also seen people that make then a sarcastic remark and whatever, and the remark is true, but the fact that it's broad sarcastic doesn't always help. And just finding a gentle way to say something and to talk, okay, let's take that to an after party. Well, we can still discuss because it's an important discussion, but maybe not for the full team. And if we move it to an after party where anyone can join who's interested, it might still be everyone. That's the interesting part. If you move it somewhere later, a lot of people might be interesting to join, but they no longer frustrated about it. And before they were like frustrated, like it's almost in 15 minutes. Why do we keep talking about it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And like as I've become more senior and got into more of a kind of coaching type of role, like what Jeff Bezos said, that famous thing that he said, that he's had a good day if he makes 3 good decisions in the day, and he typically tries to get them done by 11 a.m. I think, but that's a side issue. But for me as a coach, if I can make 3 useful interventions in the day, no more, that's been a good day. And so even small things like steering stand up back onto track, or making sure that planning has got acceptance criteria, just get the basics reminded. Even though it's all written in books and everyone has said it before, like you say, somebody has to be there to say it.
And it's and usually most people know it, and somehow, I think this was David Allen who I heard it talk. So David Allen is the person from Getting Things Done, and I think he said it somewhere in a podcast or in an interview, or I don't remember anymore. But he said also that even if he did invent that methodology, even he falls off the wagon from time to time and need to be reminded, or need to remind himself about his own methodology. And for me, that released so much stress at that time. Like, okay, so even the people who invent these kind of things, they still are not always perfect, and they still need to have some kind of push or kick or whatever that is to remind themselves about a good practice. And I think that's probably a lot what we do as coaches, is that we remind people about, in many cases, the things they already know, and give them permission to say, oh, wait a minute, let's do it again a little bit better than 5 minutes before, because that's what we are.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and it's reminded me of a quote. It could be from Gitte, I can't remember, but he said something along the lines of, in the realm of philosophy and living, there's nothing new to learn. You just have to make it your own. Being that, it's a bit like that thing I said earlier, that having a piece of information given to you versus having the realization, that deep realization of making it personal, is the important bit. So while I might be echoing back words that are in books, it's coming from a place of conviction and more embodied understanding than just reading out a sentence of a set of rules.
That's I think really important, because indeed sometimes we read something, we think we understand, we try to do it, and then we understand why the hard part about it, and then we try some more, and then after, I don't know, probably a lot longer than most of us think, it only becomes embodied in ourselves and we truly understand it. And then 5 years later, we understand it even better, I would say.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah, infinitely deep. Yeah.
And that question actually had 2 parts of it. So what's the biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for you? What's the good thing about that for you?
I think putting your mind as the sort of the central challenge of your life is just a wonderful thing to do, right? Because it is at the root of so much of our reality. So being able to, one of the things that I'm sort of big into, I don't know where this came from, is to get down to principles. So if I read a book, I kind of only want 2 or 3 principles out of it. I don't want a whole lot of detail. So like even the whole XP book, it's all there in the title, Embrace Change, that everything flows from that, right? So if I can bring like all of my life into a sort of coherent core, and that becomes a pillar of my life, then I get a compounding effect out of putting repeated effort into the same thing. So seeing that my mind is at the core of my work, how I think, how I treat others, how I treat customers, how I treat myself, it seems like I can't imagine anything better to do.
I really like that, and I link it back to the conversation I just put live last Friday with with Joshua Karyovsky and his new book, The Joy of Agility, and he talks also about some of the principles. I'm not sure if he used the word principles, but really mantras. He used the word mantras. He says, okay, there's a few mantras there that are really helpful, and I think that looks very similar to what you say. We need to distill some of the truths for us, and it doesn't matter what's the name, but it's really like, okay, what are things that are helping me, and embrace change is indeed something that it says everything that's in the book, and at the same time I need the book to understand some of the details what it is. And if you then look at I'm a subscriber of Ken Beck's what he's writing today.
Oh, tidy,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And the tidy thing is like every time he's reading, I'm just like, wow, okay, there's so much level. And I see the link between embrace change, and there's so much new things, but it's even somebody who wrote, what is it, more than 20 years ago, such an important book. He's still learning, he's still at multiple levels working. And it's like, yeah, it's for me, it's a very much yeah, an inspiration to look back and what are principles, what are mantras to look at some of these things.
Yeah, yeah. I need to get on that book actually. That's on my list.
Well, yeah, he's still busy in writing it, and I have to say he's writing very fast, so I'm getting a lot of updates that I don't always take the time to read. But every time I read something, it's like, okay, I should read the next one as well, because it's yeah, I find it very inspirational.
Mhm.
This is for me already a very interesting conversation. You talk in multiple kind of directions. I can already see why Rob invited you, because he said, yeah, this is going to be a very interesting conversation. I hear a lot of passion. I hear a lot of drive. Do you know where that passion or that drive is coming from?
Again, a challenging question, Eve. And I struggled with it, and I had to reword it a little bit before I could get any go forward with it. Because again, this whole Buddhist theme might end up becoming boring, but it's so part of it's such a part of my life that um, drive suggests to me that I've got no agency, right? That there is a compulsion to do something, and that doesn't feel like that's in me. That's not what's happening. But so again, then what's my day about? And what I started to think to answer this question was, what do I choose to pursue every day that I get up? So, in other words, what do I value? And then that precedes, rather than sort of a compulsive drive, that precedes how I go about my day, right? Um, so what do I pursue every day? I pursue my meditation practice. What that is about at a personal level is, how do I become a more rounded, tolerant, skillful, wise human being that can help the people around me. Now, where does that come from? Like, I'm going back to drawing circles on A4 sheets again, Eve, right? Where does that come from? So I'm not going there because I just don't know. It feels like the right thing to do. There is this thing in Zen of doing the right action for its own sake without trying to figure out why it's the right thing to do. It feels right in my body, in my being. It brings peace into my day. It calms my mind. That just seems like the right thing to do. So that's it on the personal level. What do I choose to pursue? And what do I choose to pursue in a professional level? I really want to become a better programmer, right? I want to understand. We only have if statements and while loops, and I've mastered them from the age of 10. How do you then scale that up so you can do large scale software? I'm still in pursuit of that with a fresh mind. And I find it endlessly fascinating that there's infinite depth into the levels that you can become better as a programmer. That's at a personal level, right? So even though most of my consultancy work is advisory and coaching and doing discovery work and building high performing teams, so I'm much less hands on keyboard. I've got my own side project that I put mornings and evenings into and whatever sort of spare time I get. And that is where I keep my fingers wet, so to speak, and try to become a better programmer. I've loved that since I was 10. It's like solving Sudoku puzzles. I just keep enjoying when something works. Um, Beyond that,
And it's
then,
so I hear, especially we talked just about, or I just talked about the conversation with Josh, who said something very similar, that he loves to do jigsaw puzzles and other kind of things. And so that solving part, is that something that that is passionate, or that's something that you do? Did you do that before you did programming, for example? Was there already something else about Sudokus or anything else?
Well, I am intently patient to see something through, right? And this is coming up spontaneously in response to what you just asked me. I used to do fishing when I was a kid, from like
Mhm.
9, 10, 11, and you often get tangles in your fishing line, and really, really bad, right? And I spent an hour and a half untangling this piece of fishing line one time, and my dad and one of his workmen couldn't believe that I had done that without throwing everything and breaking it into bits. I like seeing
Actually,
something.
at that young age, because I just imagine a few young people at that age is like, nah, I don't want to do it, and then you as a parent, you have to do that for these children, or
Right,
as a
right.
leader. So
Yeah,
that's, and was that then, so I'm imagining then a kid sitting next to the river for an hour or two trying to untangle. How should I see it? Is that
I,
something like
I,
that?
I, I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, so I brought the
Wow.
fishing. So coming home on the bicycle, everything got entangled. Yeah, and I just enjoy that. I don't know why, that absorption, right? I
Because
get
it
in.
takes a lot of detail and a lot of, yeah, attention to look at it and try it. Because untangling wire, I just think about the wires for my phone. That's already, and that's just what, like 50 centimeters or something like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. I don't know where that comes from. I really enjoy that sort of getting really concentrated into a problem. It doesn't have to be a computer problem, like something like that, and seeing that through. And it's not even I have an elation afterwards, some big elation. It's just it feels satisfying to get that done. Um, so sorry, what was the question? How did we end up here?
no, but I don't know, but I find it interesting when I asked about, okay, were you trying to do puzzles when you were younger or
Oh
things like
yes,
that? And so that this is a nice, interesting, because it's not even a puzzle that is created. It's really like a puzzle of life in one way or another, that you get that fishing line and you do it, and it's
yeah.
interesting. Um, and is that something, for example, if you talk about farming, your parents or your father in the farming, I think it takes a lot of patience to keep doing stuff. But it's different than untangling a fishing line, I would say.
Yeah, my dad, actually, this is interesting, this conversation, Eve, because now that you say that, maybe that is a trait that I see in my father, and maybe that's where I got it from, because he built a farm from very little to, a medium-sized farm that you could make a living from. And his modus operandi, I think, was just show up every day, show up every day. Um, and I don't think
And
he was
make it
looking.
a little bit better. So that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite emotional to think about that, actually. Yeah, because that's what he had to do for quite a long time. And now I can see
And
that
it's
character.
very agile. And I mean, in our agile way of working, it's like we want to iterate and we want to make things better on a day-to-day basis, I would say.
Yes, yes, yes. But we do want to do that. But again, you've gone back to the mind. There's a part of the mind that's looking for the big outcome, right? And
Mm.
oh, I want to get to this big outcome. So my dad, presumably, part of his mind would be going, I want 10,000 acres, and I want to be the big rancher around town. But the reality is, you just have to keep turning up and add a square meter to the farm every day, metaphorically. Um, yeah. So it's I think that's where
And
the
again, a lot less glamorous than when we talk about the 10,000 acres or the astronaut or anything. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
But that's, yeah, you say these are powerful questions, and I'm still amazed that I originally drew them up in like 5 to 10 minutes
Wow.
without much thinking. But it's also about everything that we can think around them. Like you say, the way you answer them is it's really like, okay, it makes you think, you go somewhere else, and then we see what that brings us. That's, I find that's even more amazing than just the questions, that the people and like you that spend that much energy to think about where can these questions drive us, without going too much into, because I can also see what you said earlier on. Sometimes we're just mumbling on, and this is more for me like, okay, trying to understand where people are or where we're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying this. I'm getting a lot out of it. It's even though like meditation is deeply introspective, it's not conscious interrogation of your beliefs. It's more like quietening and getting into a sort of a deeper intelligence. But this definitely seems like a worthwhile activity. So it's going in an unexpected way for me too.
Well, thanks to hear you, and I enjoy it as well. So let's move to that, and that's for a lot of people also a very hard question. What's your biggest achievement? And I think for many people, the hardest question below is that this is basically your moment to brag. And so the question below is that is it easy for Mike to brag and to be really proud of what you've achieved so far?
I think this was the toughest question, even because when I asked what's my biggest achievement, nothing happens in my brain. You know, I mean, that sounds really sad. Um, and is it sad? Again, it's this thing about uh, not looking for the big outcome. I'm not in pursuit. I'm very self-motivated, I think, Eve. Maybe this is what's happening. And that the journey, the day-to-day journey for me is the whole point of the thing. And it's enjoyable in and of itself. And I suppose I can look back at certain things and say, well, that outcome worked out pretty well. And I'm glad how this team ended up working. These kind of like mini celebrations. But I don't think there's been anything massive because, again, a bit like my dad, I just turn up every day. I try to turn up every day as fresh as I can and give everything. Um, and, and actually, Eve, I think
Which
that's
is
an
a big
achievement.
Exactly, which is a very big achievement if you can turning up every day and doing and yeah, that's an achievement in its own, because usually indeed we look at the peaks, but we don't see, yeah, if you win the Olympics, for example, people see that as okay, that's that 5 seconds that you run whatever. But actually the big achievement is the 4 years before or the 20 years before that we worked relentlessly in
Yeah,
improving ourselves.
I think so. Yeah, and that's absolutely right. I think I have, if I have one good instinct, I think it's to figure out what a compounding activity is. And then
Mm,
once I'm confident that this is a compounding activity, I invest myself fully in it, and I can keep myself motivated to just to turn up. Right. So the motto I've got above my monitor in my other room is focus on a problem, keep turning up, and that
mm,
just keep chipping away on the same set of problems rather than, because you can keep turning up and do scatterbrain stuff. You could say, oh, today I'm going to do some Ruby, and next week I'm going to do some Scala, and then you're not compounding on anything. Well, you might be, but do you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to say, if I can funnel my
mhm.
activity into a concentrated energy, I think that is something that I've got a good instinct for. So that might be my single biggest achievement, because I do remember considering going for uh, a Y Combinator fundraise one time. And one of the things that they had was, what's your biggest achievement? And people write, getting to base camp or running a marathon. I was going, I don't have any of that to talk about, but I do my meditation practice religiously for the last 30 years, and I don't miss, even though it's like super boring sometimes. That's not a big flashy achievement, but I think it's a sign of somebody who can get results. Um, but I suppose, the last gig I've been on, Eve, has been one of the most enjoyable and successful. We're not fully finished yet, but it's looking super, super promising. So I am going to mention this a little bit. That we're working for an organization that needs to produce a regulatory report every year that involves all kinds of disparate data systems. And a large consultancy tried it last year and couldn't make it happen. But I led a team that did discovery on this over a 4-week period, and we just followed the data flows, drew them out, got them working in Jupyter notebooks, and then I came up with a simple design that would allow us to track all those transformations from the systems of record into a report. And the achievement there was keeping the simple, as opposed to going for the flashy output. Then I spent the first 3 or 4 weeks with the team building the skeleton of this. And ever since, I've been stepping away. And it's at the point now where the team is elite. It's really flying. And I'm sitting on the sofa, metaphorically, just making sure that that everything is still in order. And that
And
feels
that
really
they
good.
don't make it again complex and everything that
Yep.
you, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely recognize some of these things, that sometimes that's what we need to do with teams, is making sure that they focus on, okay, let's keep it simple, but let's do the right things. And if there is pressure for whatever, because what I'm hearing, and I don't know if it's true, but what I'm hearing is that they have been failing, or there's a large organization that failed before. And so that's typically something, a project that's under a lot of pressure, that a lot of eyeballs has on, and then it's very tempting to react to all of these eyeballs instead of just, okay, no, let's focus. We said we're going to do this, let's do this, and let's make sure that this is improving. Ignore the eyeballs, and then you or someone else is keeping them away, or at least reporting something, but that the team can continue working. Is that a little bit for the...
That's completely correct, Eve. And in terms of these important decisions that Jeff Bezos talks about, I think the best one I made on that was that we're going to build this, the first version of this, as a command line tool, right? So we're going to, this enterprise has a horrible big cloud platform. And I said, if we go near that, we'll never get anywhere. So we'll build this using command line. And that allowed the dev team to iterate extremely quickly. They were completely unencumbered by anything other than solving the problem and sitting down with the customer. And in the space of a couple of months, we got the core part of the business logic solved in a little library that had a CLI invoker. And I think that was a good decision. And now we're trying to get involved in their cloud.
But you already have basically data, or you have the big problem is solved. You can prove it probably in one way or another. And now it's about, and what I'm hearing, especially if it's common based, that you can probably have a lot of tests and everything around there that prove that things are. So if you need to adapt something for that cloud platform, you immediately, your test will tell you, well, now you broke something, and now you can, that's sounds like a very smart way of basically solving first, how would I say it, the game engine, and then adding the UI on top of it, or something like that.
Exactly. I didn't. Well, that allowed us to do a couple of things. It allowed us to keep the team small initially to solve the problem and grow slowly, rather than throw on a bunch of people who are data engineers, like mashing the data, and a bunch of people who are front-end engineers, and a bunch of people who are cloud engineers. And then suddenly you have a team of 15 people all figuring out what are we doing. So and also there was the challenge of winning over the client, because the client had been burned before. And we were able to demonstrate quite quickly that we could go from their data sets to the required output, but it's a CLI tool and it's all working on somebody's laptop. But they didn't mind that. The business people really only want to see the outcome. They don't care about cloud. So I'm quite pleased. I'm quite pleased with that. I'm going to say it's an achievement.
Yeah, it is. I think it is, and it shows again, like, okay, it's one of these things in the Agile Manifesto. It's like, okay, we want to work with clients, we want to work with a team that is motivated, we want to show outcomes, basically. And okay, I'm not using the right words of the manifesto, but these are all these things that are there. And it's there's nowhere in these things we have to work with whatever cloud, because of course at that moment the cloud officially didn't exist.
That's right.
But all these principles, they are still there and they still work. It's just not as flashy as some of these things, but clients don't care that much. Well, some of the clients care about the flashiness, but most care about solving a problem, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we can add the flashy parts to it. So that's indeed a very nice achievement. Okay, you wanted to add?
I did, because seeing Rob speak so nicely about me brought me back to that particular project. And I think there's a reason that he remembers it fondly, as I do. I can't remember, 2017, maybe 2018. It was a construction management company in London who understood that they needed to go digital, because construction is still done on napkins and Excel spreadsheets. And the young team that were trying to stand this up had somehow convinced the executive to invest an amount of money in starting 2 digital products. And myself and Rob and we were 5 or 6 people from a consultancy, bootstrapped that. And that is now a digital division with 40 people in it. And they're still operating in the way that myself and Rob helped set up. As I understand it, I spoke to the director maybe 9 months ago, and he said, yeah, it's still how you and Rob did it. And that feels really good. I'm still in touch with those people, made friends there. And there's one, so that's great. I'm super happy about that. But I reflect on it quite a bit, Eve, because why was that one a success? And so many other similar ones that I was involved in less so. And I think the reason is they were not, they didn't think that they knew how to do software already, right? That when you go into an organization,
ready to listen.
like they were at zero. And I think most of the time when you go into a big enterprise, you have to first get them to zero, right? You have to get them from whatever minus level they are in terms of their capability, because they think they know what they're doing. And without being arrogant, they don't know what they're doing. They're driving in the wrong direction. So it's a negative quantity. And your job then as a consultant is at least get them to zero. And then maybe we can get to one. But
Well,
going into
and you
this,
first need them to get to listen to you before you get them to zero, because sometimes people inside large organizations are like, yeah, okay, they brought in another consultant. What will happen now? Because they've seen dozens of us before.
yeah,
Some people have completely no experience, and some have. Yeah, that's another hard part of that.
absolutely. And then the organization is usually stratified. So you have a
Mm.
cloud layer, and you have a digital layer, and then you have a process layer, and they're all like they've got their own careers, right? So yeah, so this was completely clear ground. And I guess in terms of the single best outcome there was, rather than them go in and roll out a prescribed version of Scrum as they read it in the book, we tried to build it incrementally. And then I think they now have a better understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, rather than just saying because this is what the process is. So I think that's, in terms of organizational transformation, that's probably the best achievement that I've been involved in.
These are really nice examples of achievements, and I really like also what you said at the end is like, okay, we're not just taking anything out of the book, because that's, yeah, and for many of us the default question we get, can we do X or Y by the book, and or can we do agile by the book? And then I point to all these books behind me, it's like, yeah, but they're all describing something else. Which one do you want? Which version of agile do you
Yeah,
want? And none of them will work for a certain company. We need to build and create our own book inside the company, because the company is different, and it's not that default Scrum out of the book won't work at any of these, but that we need to build it together before they understand it.
yeah, exactly. So some of these larger organizations I've gone into, on day one, they say, are we using Scrum? Are we using Kanban? Are we using Scrumban? They've all been, mashed up together. Are we using, and that's the first question that they want to get asked. And,
Mm.
yeah, it's difficult when an organization, well, let me put it this way. It's easier when an organization is at zero, and it's extremely enjoyable. It was one of the best times I ever had. And working with Rob, I got to give back to him the kind of stuff that he was saying about me. I still remember Rob. I reached out to him, like, I think just before, looking at the timings, just before I interviewed with you. And he's the most empathetic. His whole interview with you his empathy came across. He's 11 out of 10 on empathy, and it's a real pleasure to work with him. The whole team was good, but Rob for me really stuck out.
Well, I'm sure he will, or I don't know if he will listen back, but I assume he will, because I remember in the after conversation he was really talking also about, look, I'm really looking forward to what Mike will be saying. So I think I feel that same connection here when you talk about him. So I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he will like it. And we kind of already moved into some of the personal tips, but do you have anything, a personal agility tip that you want to share?
Yeah, well, I think you just kind of nailed it, Eve. My tip and my approach is to start with nothing, right?
Mm,
Do not go in saying that we're going to install Scrum, or we're going to install Safe, or we're going to use Kotlin, or we're going to use microservices, or any of these things. Go in with nothing. It's like you said, you have to have read the books, and you have to have internalized it before you get there. But if you can, go in with nothing, because software is dialogued into existence. Digital products is all about the dialogue, and then the reification of that dialogue, and then the refinement of that dialogue. So all you need to do is to go in with your first question. And honestly, the first question only needs to be, hello, dear customer, what's your name? And you can take it from there, right? What do you need?
It's interesting you say about the name, because I immediately had a flash to an exercise. I sometimes, well, we all do exercise and we all do kind of things, and I remember doing, and I don't remember what it was anyway, but anyway, a few years back, we did some kind of exercise at the conference. And the very first question I asked after the first round is that, okay, you now been here with 5, 6 people doing something. I don't remember anymore what, but my question was, did you introduce yourself? It's like, no, we didn't.
Yes, yes.
Like, and of course in a team we kind of know, but you come in a conference and there's like 5, 6 people thrown together in a group, and there's maybe 1 or 2 that know each other, and then there's another group where also, but you don't even physically introduce. Hi, I'm Eve. How are you? Before we start, we jump. Oh, Eve said, or whoever was the trainer said something, and we don't even think about saying, okay, this is my name. How, and this is, and it makes such a huge difference just
Yeah,
knowing the name of the other person. And I'm really bad at names, so I know that I need to do better, or I want to do better. But it's so much difference just to state your own name and say, okay, this is me, and who are you? And probably even a little more know, okay, how are you, where are you living, what country, what
y-
language you speak, and whatever. But just that name makes a huge difference.
absolutely, absolutely. And to ask, yeah, to ask not only your teammates but the customer, right?
Mm.
It's you got to know the customer, what they want. Well, it can start as simple as that, and I find that it can be surprising for a client to encounter that level of desire for human connection. For me, it's going back to that warm bread, right? That when I built that thing for the guy who runs trees, it was like my skill was baking bread, and I gave somebody bread and they appreciate it. There's a humane element to software delivery that, well, there can be. It's seen as sort of a very geeky thing where people who like to be in dark rooms and stuff, but it's a super humane thing to do because you're there to help people
Mm.
automate whatever it is that they do. So yeah, that would be my thing. Don't go in with a preconceived idea. You're going to have it, right? It goes back to that thing of the mind is going to be there, quickly trying to grab for something familiar, so that you can immediately put the problem in a box and not have to worry about the discomfort of not knowing. But to the degree that you can, go in empty, even every day, but certainly at the beginning, go in empty, and that involves the technology stack, that involves preconceived ideas about the industry, it involves preconceived ideas about the process itself. All of these things have to be continually dialogued around, and it's never done. Um, I saw Dan North tweet one time. I don't know if this is quote is his, but software is done in the same way as the lawn is mowed. Like it's never done. It's continually, there's a continuous thing happening there. So embrace that, and this is
That's a
why.
really good quote. Yeah, so I don't know indeed if it came from him or not, but it's indeed the same kind of thing. Well, I heard someone this earlier, but late, like 30 years ago. It's like software is done the moment that it's no longer used, and then it's done.
Right.
And
Yes.
it's the same thing with a house. A house, you need to. I
Yeah.
once heard when you build a house, I think the money that people have to spend on keeping the house living and improving is like 2 or 3 times higher as building the house over the years
Wow.
until it's broken down. Okay, in Europe that's probably around 100 years or something like that. In United States, it's much faster. But it's insane if you then see the amount of money that we spent on building a house, then realizing, wait a minute, that's it's never done. We have to keep working. We have to keep thinking about things.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use that. There's a client I'm with right now, and they think once they get the version 1.0, they're finished. Um, this I guess what makes it difficult as a metaphor is people don't understand how software can degrade in the way that bricks and mortar does. But like the environment is continually changing around it, the business environment, the cloud environment that it runs in, people up. So it's not like, I guess the logic that you have unit tested will stay
Mm.
constant, but the environment around it keeps shifting. So the two have to be taken as a gestalt. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing, and indeed, well, the other thing is that we've been building houses for at least 2,000 years, probably a lot longer. We've only been building software like, I don't know, 100 years if you exaggerate a little bit
Yeah.
at the level. And we're using tools to improve our skills, and we are the building blocks getting faster and bigger and whatever. Although I think in building a house that changes also a lot, because now we're talking also about 3D printing houses and all kind of things. So there's a lot of things moving there as well. And if you compare building houses now to 2000 years ago, it's definitely completely different. But software is moving much faster, I would say, than how building houses do. But yeah, and there is a dangerous metaphor to keep using building houses and software. There's a lot of things where that metaphor breaks down. And at
Yeah.
the same time, we've done something very strange a couple of years back. We had a almost 100-year-old house, and we were talking for years, like, what will we do? And so for more than 20 years, we're thinking about how to change it, because it was bad at multiple levels. And at some point, somebody said at the holiday party, like at the family party, said, well, Eve, just build a house in the garden. You have a large garden, build a house in the garden, and then break down the other. And at first it was like, okay, you keep drinking, but it kept stuck in our head. That's in the end what we did. And we have a completely different house. But then what I realized while doing that is that in the old house, we had things that were limited, because you only could build to the old house. If you build a new one, everything goes back. You have to rethink everything. How big will it be? So that it was completely different. And I used it a lot to think about software, because in software, I didn't want to build a new thing. I prefer to keep improving it, because usually when you see building people something completely new, when they have no experience in cleaning something up, they end up with something that is as big as a mess as the old one.
Yeah.
But I've learned through that experience that maybe sometimes the technical depth is so high, which it was with the old house, that it is the best solution to do something new. A house of about 100 years old is that old. It's almost impossible to make it modern, to revamp it, and to make it practical and whatever we wanted to do. So it also helped me to rethink some of these metaphors.
Yeah, I think that, refactor or rebuild one in software is a really difficult one to be certain on. I mean, I don't think you can be certain on. And I've seen both work. And in my own side project, I decided I've had to rebuild it, and it ended up being the best decision I ever made. And it almost, like, some people say that the first version of the software is where you do all the learning, and the second version of the software is where you build it correctly. And that's how it feels for me. And the other thing I'm put in mind of is,
I want to go a little bit back to what you just said, because then it's the same person that rebuilds it.
right,
Yeah?
right, that's important.
And what I hear so many people is, okay, we'll start all over, but then they work with another team and they make the same mistakes again, and they haven't learned anything from that.
That will not work. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, that's a super important point to call out. But the other thing that it reminded me of, and this is like just is Kent Beck's TDD book, TDD Explained, where he did the money bag example for the 100th time, and he said he came up with a different way of approaching it. I think in the book he ended up adopting a kind of an expression idea as a way of representing it, whereas before it was arithmetic. And he says it just never ceases to surprise him that every time he comes to the same boring problem, he can potentially end up going a completely different route. And then that's only possible if you're adopting the rewrite mindset.
And I think I saw he has a few, I think 3 or 4 videos online about that new what's it called? I can't come up with the name, but the technique that you write something, immediately commit, and if it's not working, you
yeah.
CDR. I don't remember anymore.
Yeah, I saw Dave Farley interviewed him about it, and I was going, wow, that sounds really crazy. He said a bit like TDD was not received that well at the beginning, that he thinks this will take time to get into people's minds. So I'm still trying to bring a fresh mind to that.
Well, you need to see after that, indeed, the interview with Dave, I went up and looked up the videos that he did it, and it's insane. You see him saying, okay, I'm doing this, and that's the result. He pushes enter, and it's like, oh, it didn't work. Why it didn't work? And so it's insane, and especially seeing somebody like Kent, who's one of the bigger, one of, for me, a developer that really knows what he's doing. He
Yeah.
still considers himself, I'm not saying junior, but as someone who's not the best developer, because I think one of his famous quotes is, I'm a normal developer with good attitudes, of good practices,
Practices, yeah.
which is something I like. But even there, he's had a lot of experience, years and years of developing in a tool, in a language he knows, and doing something that's like, oh, that didn't go the way I expected. It's such mind-blowing 2-3 videos. They're not that long, but it's really interesting to see. And indeed, I can understand why many people will reject it right away. But it tells us so much about, okay, we think we understand what one line of software is doing, and it's
Yeah.
not doing that way. It's talking about feedback loops and going faster in feedback loops. It's insane.
Yeah, and something that's quite admirable in that is to not be comfortable on a plateau. Like he's somehow continually able to keep a ramp up in terms of his learning. And I actually, maybe back to the challenge question, I do feel like I'm a little bit plateaued now, that I can program most problems. I can find a solution to most problems, and I'm comfortable in that. But what's beyond that, unless you're willing to question it, you won't actually even consider that there might be another way.
I think it reminds me of Tiger Woods. At some point, he said, "Okay, I'm the best golfer in the world, and I'm doing this. And then for the next season, I'm using a completely different technique, and now I have to basically start all over." And he's become, I don't know, probably not the worst, but still
Yeah,
not no longer in the top 10. And then keep doing it for another year, and by the end of the year, he's so much better in that new technique that he outperforms again everybody. And daring to indeed start all over, start from fresh, start becoming. But I think that's a lot of what we need to do when you're plateauing at some level, is dare to become again a junior in
yeah,
whatever you're doing it. Of course, you didn't forget whatever you did before, but you need to practice. And yeah,
yeah,
and it's
definitely.
very hard,
Great
I think.
advice.
it's
Yeah,
it's very hard once you're good at something to dare to say, okay, let's start something new, let's start something at a
yeah,
different
super
level.
hard.
It's I think this is, for me, would also be a little bit the advice behind why, when I think 20 years ago, when people said you need to start learning a new language every year, it's a little bit like that. It's keeps you challenging. It keeps you thinking about, okay, there is functional program, there's OO programming, there's other kind of things. It just forces your mind to think in different kind of languages and different kind of ways of working.
Yeah, and that's why I like being a consultant, right? Because you get it put into so many different contexts the whole time, right? That in itself stops me plateauing. But I still think I could make more conscious effort there.
Yeah, I want to stress out a little bit what you said about the consultant part, because um, I'm now working with teams where sometimes people are there and they're like 5-6 years in the same company, and they've grown. They're no longer a junior, but at the same time, they have only worked in one company. If people are just fresh from
Yeah,
school and being in one company, and I think as consultants, we sometimes grow much faster. Okay, we don't always learn in a deep way. If you're working 10, 20 years in one company, you learn at a different level. But consultants are forced very quickly to adapt in another kind of language, in another kind of situation, in another thing. So I think there is deep learning on both sides, but in a completely different way.
yeah.
You agree with that?
I would agree, and the idea that has spawned in my head. Let me see if I can map it or not. Is um, Simon Wardley, the guy who does
Mhm.
Wardley mapping. He has this narrative about pioneers, settlers, and town planners. And he said that when he was a junior CEO, he could see that some teams were discordant with each other and other teams were really high performing. And all the people on the team were excellent. So he couldn't figure out, he was struggling to figure out why that was the case. And then I think he realized that it's not that they were not good, it was that there were different temperaments. That at the beginning of
Mm.
a product or project, you need people that he called pioneers, people who are happy to go into nothing and build something and then get bored and want to move on. And he says, as the product then starts to mature, you need to hand that over to people who are, he calls settlers. His metaphor, I think, was the taming of the West in America. So the pioneers kept moving west, going out into the countryside, living off rabbits that they were killing and washing in rivers. And then when other people joined them and started to put up camps and a bit of structure, they disliked that and moved further west again. And then when the settlers were joined by town planners and they put in mayors and laws and structures, the settlers wanted to move a little bit. But they're all excellent at what they do and they're all necessary to build civilization. So he mapped this same idea to pioneer settlers, town planners in software. At the genesis of a project or product, you need the pioneer types. And then you need to hand it over to settlers who will put in an op model, will put in monitoring, logging, make the thing operate, make the thing available. And then that gets handed over to town planner types who will put in the run books and the documentation and make sure that the thing is maintainable for 10 years. And he said, so it's not, you just need to be sensitive to where you are in the product lifecycle and staff it correctly, and then make sure to pass over from team to team. I hope I'm representing the idea correctly. It's how I've internalized it anyway, and it works for me when I'm interacting with organizations. So I think often when you go into an organization where there are people established, they're in the pioneer, they're in the settler or town planner mindset, and you're coming in as a pioneer to inject new ideas. So you need to be super sensitive to the fact that, you know, like how that dynamic is going to play out. And some people will come forward to the new ideas and some people won't. And that's just the reality of the situation. So yeah, that's how I map that reality when I print it.
I really like that, and I've heard Simon talk about this as well. And indeed, well, sometimes, well, if you look at large organizations, we talked about enterprises before. If they want to move into a more, if it's agile or if it's something else, more innovative kind of thing, it's almost impossible without external help, because a lot of these people, well, I used to, well, I'm not even sure if it's a joke, but I used to joke that the people inside insurance companies and banks were the kind of people who were looking for stability. And what we need in these types of organizations these days is definitely not stability. We need things to be shaken up at multiple levels. And they have the wrong kind of people who are attracted to these kind of organizations, and wrong, well, right, for the kind of thing, because of course my money in a bank, I want the bank to be stable at multiple levels, but at the same time I also want them to innovate and have apps that I can use. It's yeah, so we need kind of both kind of types, and it's interesting. And like you say, a lot of consultants are typical the kind of people who are good at consulting, are more the kind of pioneers who like to also move on when things are kind of settling.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's I've seen this done most successfully in the likes of insurance companies. When you set up an explicit R&D lab, and that is peopled by the pioneer types who are still deeply steeped in the knowledge of the industry, and you set up an organizational structure where the research does go into the settling function of the organization. I think it has to be done that way, because I think there's a deep insight in what Wardley is suggesting there. And somebody's told me that that's not his idea, possibly it isn't. But you know, I've got a lot of mileage out of it in terms of interviewing people, right? So am I interviewing here for a settler, a town planner, or a pioneer? So I try to find that person, you try to find a match for the environment they're going into. And then in an organization, what type of a function are we building here? Is it a pioneering function, a settling function, or a town planning function? And that helps to know the context of what you're operating in.
yeah, I want to go a little bit again, very little on what you said about, okay, is it Simon's idea or not? And it really doesn't matter. It's like you said in the beginning. Yeah, we sometimes we need to repeat. I even heard Ken Beck say at some point, like, I thought I invented something inside XP, and then 20 years later I discovered actually it was somewhere in a course that I had at university, but I
Right.
reverted it in different. So there's no new ideas, and there was always new ideas in the sense that the way we present it. And I think what Simon has done is make a lot of, well, fuss, or a lot of people more aware about these things, and still not enough people, I would say, because it's some of his ideas on the Wardley maps are, yeah, are so new for companies that yeah, there still needs to be a lot of things. So I asked about a personal agility tip, and we moved in all kind of directions with lots of
Yeah,
tips.
yeah. Sorry.
Right?
Yeah.
No, that's well. It's for me. It's sometimes I get a question, what kind of tip you're looking for? I'm like, I definitely don't want to define it because it gives the
Mhm.
opportunity to move in very big directions and everything. But that said, let's move to the next question because we're already talking for a very long time, and I'm really interested to learn about remote experience. So what
Mm.
for me, we're moving in a direction where we will have remote one way or another, and so I would like to know what kind of experience you have and what kind of tip you have for working remote.
Yeah, it's yeah, multifaceted views on this one, Eve. For the last 8 weeks, I've been 100% remote
Mhm.
because my wife had surgery and she was not independent, and I needed to look after her. And I can tell you, I was so pleased that was possible. Um, just how it can accommodate your life. Pre-COVID, I don't know what we would have done, to be honest with you, because just wouldn't have been acceptable for me to say
Mhm.
to an organization that I'm spending 8 weeks working from home. So I'm extremely glad it's happened. Um, and it's an hour for me to commute, and it's an hour home. So I'm able to look after my wife. I'm able to do some exercise. You know, my lifestyle is better. My work-life balance is a lot better. And I don't think I'm not delivering. I am delivering everything that's required of me. What I'd say beyond that is that this particular engagement, I said I led 4 weeks of discovery for us to understand in detail what the requirements were in the production of this regulatory report for this client. And that a year before, a big consultancy had failed to get it done. I think the root cause for that bigger consultancy not getting it done, giving them their due, is that the discovery was done remotely. And
Mhm.
our discovery was done intensively face to face. We spent 3 days a week on site with the client, and we sat with them intensively around a whiteboard, going through this thing in detail, building Jupyter notebooks, building relationships, having donuts together, having coffee together. I am convinced that that would not have worked remotely. I don't think this project would have been a success. So I think
You
during
just
discovery,
donut development or something like that, or
don't
donut.
don't I actually, Eve, like it got, I said, oh, we have to get donuts. Every week I said, or every day we have to get donuts, and I never did. So it
Mm.
got, I just kept forgetting. So it got to be a running joke. And then at the end of the discovery, I brought 2 boxes of donuts, and people were shocked and ended up getting a sugar rush and falling asleep. Um, but at least we were joking about donuts. My
Mm.
point being that there was a very human connection. Um,
Mm.
that we needed intense time from the subject matter experts that understood the problem, and trying to get their patients over the phone, I think, is hard. Whereas we were able to build a human connection with them, saying, look, lads, I know this is difficult. I know this is, we're not getting this as quick as we should. It took us 4 days to get the basic point of what it was that they were trying to produce. And
Wow.
then, yeah, and
And
then
that's physically 4 days physically.
four
Did
days
I understand?
physically, 4 days
Wow.
physically.
Imagine trying doing this remote where you probably would not even have 4 days in a row remote.
No, I don't think it's possible. And then, you have the same whiteboard to go back to so you can resume the conversation. Yeah, I think for me, that's the only way that could have worked. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe technology will get better and help with that. But at the minute, if I was to do another discovery for a similar problem again, I would request that we do it together intensively. And we pre-booked all the time of the SMEs for the 4 weeks involved, so we were guaranteed to get their time. Subsequent to that, and the people who are developing the software were involved in the discovery as well. The core people were. So we formed a nucleus of a team as well, and there was a real there was a sense of mission that
So
we
it's
took into.
not a set of analysts talking with the clients and then moving on with a separate group of people then.
No, the consultancy I'm with right now, they're all super personable, very intelligent people. I mean, it's an absolutely potent force. So they carried through from the discovery into the delivery. We had a team ethos formed around that, and a mission, and a real understanding of the value of this to the customer. So it wasn't just that we were doing data transformations. We were helping Tom's life. We were helping Wayne's life. We were making Kathy's life better. And we knew that when we did playback with them and we saw their delight because it was in the room, that feels good. We were bringing them warm bread. But subsequent to that, we've gone almost fully remote now, that we only spend a day a week with the client because we now understand the problem, we can run on our own. So it has to be hybrid. So I think that's...
With hybrid, you mean, wait, just because I see a lot of misunderstanding. With hybrid, you mean remote work from time to time, physical work from time to time, but hybrid not in a sense that partially remote, partially physically, or how should what the definition is?
I guess I've been lazy with the definition of hybrid there. What I mean in this particular circumstance is that front part of the activity has to be heavily loaded towards face-to-face, in my view, depending on the problem. Like if we as engineers come in looking to solve a problem, don't understand it, we have to spend time with the SMEs, the subject matter experts, understanding what the problem is. And it's my assertion that that's done, it's best done face-to-face. And as we get comfortable with the problem and start demonstrating value back to them, that can taper off to the point where it's maybe 1 day a week together. So maybe a different word than hybrid might be front-loaded face-to-face.
Yeah, thanks for that extra, because I see a lot of misunderstanding, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I understood it fully. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, I interrupted.
But
go ahead.
So like that's one reality. Another reality is on my side project. It's open source. It's technical, and it's all on GitHub. And it's a tool to help. It's kind of like a low code tool for small businesses. And I'm collaborating with 3 other people around the world. There's a person in Nigeria, there's a person in Belfast, there's a person in Turkey, and we've never met, and it's going great. So what I would say about that, the difference there is that we are also the subject matter experts because it's a technical tool being built by technologists. So there's no brain transfer that's necessary.
So you're your own client in one way or another.
Exactly. And we understand we understand the mind of who all the potential other clients might be as well. In that context, it can work.
I think this is really important because my father used to be one of these early developers, early programmers, and he told me that when they started with IT back then, that the people they were working for most of the time were also kind of engineers and kind of technicians. So a lot of what we've been working on and a lot of the first programmer ways of working was for these kind of people that working for people like their own. So a lot of that was, you could work that way, especially like you said now, because you knew those clients, because you were one of these as well. And I think that's something really important to see that, okay, when we work in a different way, when we work for clients who are, like you said, okay, a tree building, that's not your job. You don't know it. You need to work very closely with these kind of people. That's a completely different kind of reality than if you're developing tools for developers.
Absolutely. And unless you can sit with somebody who is using your output, you can't, because you're a geek, right? So a UI with 15 buttons on it is perfectly normal for you, but a UI with 15 buttons on it for somebody who's an insurance processor is probably intimidating, right? So and that comes across usually with facial expressions and that kind of stuff. So I'm happy to produce a UI with 15 buttons for all my geeky friends because I know that they'll be comfortable with that. So I don't need to talk to them as much. So
that kind of reminds me of trying to think. The book is somewhere behind me, but there's a book from the guy who invented Visual Basic, Alan, can't come up with his name, sorry. But he wrote a book, a very good book about user interfaces and design. And he said, if you ask a developer, if you're boarding a plane and you ask a developer if they want to go left to go to the cockpit, or you want to go right and to be sitting 2 hours doing nothing, most developers would love to go. And if you have the opportunity, most developers would love to go into the cockpit and have to all these buttons. Where most of your end users, they want to sit down and relax for 2 hours. They don't want to be doing that kind of stuff.
That's perfect.
But now you have these developers loving all these tools and all these buttons, creating software for users who hate it.
Yes, it's perfect. It's a perfect illustration of the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted, but I always love that that I think it's coming from the book that's called The Inmates or The Asylums or
Oh, the
something
inmates are
like
running the asylum. Yeah, by Cooper.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
Alan
right.
Cooper, that's the name.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that I think it's that book or the opposite, the next book he wrote. It's wonderful, that kind of thing. In
I think that's starting to shift a little bit, Eve. Like, so the consultancy that I'm working through right now is a data and AI consultancy.
Mhm.
You could hardly imagine anything more geeky. But we are hiring UX people to make sure that the solutions that we're delivering have meaning to normal people. And these UX people are stunningly good, and the output that they produce is so important for the developers to understand, to give them context of what they're producing.
Yeah, I fully agree. We're the software, that book was like 20 years old, so luckily
Yeah,
our industry has moved on a little bit. But it's like you said, the developers, like some of them, we still like these buttons, and for us, it might be good enough. I call myself us in that part. But indeed, the our end users, they didn't move on. I mean, they still like the and well, in that sense, a lot of developers see the difference. If you look at Apple, if you look at some of the other things that are designed the way, it's like, okay, some of them we like as well. These things that are much better interfaces than what we
yeah,
used to have. Say,
yeah.
um, okay, sorry, I interrupted because I thought it was a nice example.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's my summation of remote work. That in certain contexts where there is a bridging between technology and business that the technologists don't understand, that you have to give yourself every chance of success by doing that face to face. Because technology serving technology, I think it's less necessary.
Mm.
Yeah, that's where it feels for me right now.
I think that's yeah, a very good way of putting it that way. I want to I have something strange on my computer. I think it's fixed now. Anyway, I wanted to move to that next question about a book. What is a book that you have read that you want to talk about?
Yeah, this is it's weird, Eve. I read unbelievable amount in my 20s and 30s, and it's fallen off a cliff in the last 5 or 6 years. I haven't really read much a lot. I'm looking over there now. The last book I read was Sapiens. Tried to read Sapiens. I gave up. I just found it boring. Um, so my reading has fallen off a cliff, and I think it's come to the point now where, like what I said, I tried to go in with nothing. It feels to me, and
Mm,
this may be a plateau thing. I feel like I know enough based on what I've read to now execute, and I'm preferring the execution piece. Having said that, the books that are formative to me are Badass by Kathy Sierra. Um, I
going to
think that
try to bring that one up.
mhm. I think it's
That's
making users awesome. Making users awesome. So a bit again, Eve, right? Like extreme programming and embrace change. The tagline for a book sums up the whole principle, and
mm,
oftentimes that's all I come away with from the book. Like the tagline that kind of drives my direction of thinking in terms of a principle. But I think she also gave a great example of, let's say, a camera, right? That people buy a camera. She says that the point of good digital point of all good products is to make the user a better version of themselves. And she uses the
mm,
point of a camera that the reason a person buys a camera is because they want to be a better photographer. So your job as a camera maker is to do that. But you get all this fancy, simple marketing of people taking shots and seeing these amazing outcomes. And then they get this 50-page manual where it's like just a wall of text. And they look at the back of the camera and it's 25 buttons. They're going, how do I take a reasonable shot here at nighttime? And they don't know. So I think the point with software is that you don't have to present that interface to a user when they first start, right? You can
mm.
have, when they use your digital equivalent of a camera, there just needs to be a take picture button, right? And then you let them take a few pictures. And then if your software if you care enough about your users, you will look at the quality of the software that they're produced because you want to make them awesome photographers. Sorry, you look at the quality of the photographs they take because you
Mm.
want to make them awesome photographers. And you might say, well, there's a rule of thirds in photography, right? So you want the central piece in the middle third and in the background, So you could analyze the photos and say, you're not adhering to the rule of thirds. Do you know what that is? And they may or may not. And then you can take them on a journey, and then the camera becomes a little bit more capable with a few more buttons on it. So her whole point was that, you don't present, well, one of the points is you don't present the final interface as soon as somebody lands on your software. It evolves with them as they're on their learning journey. And really, the software experience, the whole UX, is a learning experience. So you've got an opportunity to make the person a better version of themselves. Super amazing book. I can't say enough good things about it.
It's interesting because I see the link again to the book that I referred to from Alan Cooper as well, where he in that, and that's definitely in that second book, where he said that for at least he said it in that book, that you need three kind of interfaces. You need that very simple interface for a very first person. That could be what, and back in that time, were like wizards. So you want to do something, and it's a wizard that clicks you through all the things, and you don't need to know anything. You get all asked the questions. You get a second interface for a person. So his example, I think, was about creating an invoice. If you create an invoice like once a year or something like that, and okay, I think that you have three kind of actions. So you start an accountancy system. So the first thing is a wizard, where you get some kind of question that you probably do that like once a year or something like that, and or once in a lifetime. So you really want to have the right questions. Adding an invoice is something that you will do multiple times. So you'll probably have an interface where you can fill it in, because people get to know it. And then you do kind of things that that experts are doing, and maybe you want to upload hundreds invoices from another system, and there you need some kind of API that you can do. These are three kind of interfaces, and I see that in the talk that you have, is that she says, okay, you start out with that very first way of doing it, and then gradually you add stuff to it so that people can move on, and so they're helped to become more expert. Is that a little bit how I understand it?
Yes, it's exactly that, but a couple of maybe nuances on that, Eve. Like that, what Alan Cooper has described there is a set of explicitly created interfaces for a set of levels of capability, and that's great, right? Doing that would be a huge step forward. But what I'm feeling is emerging now, and I'm playing with this in my side project, is what I'm calling adaptive UX, because I've now embedded an AI. So the system starts with nothing, and as you start building things, there's an AI trying to figure out where you are. I say there's an AI. All it is sending JSON to ChatGPT. Right? Yeah, it's but
it's an AI, but you didn't build it yourself. You're just doing something in the background.
Yeah, exactly. But what this is opening is a stunning new vista for me, I think, in terms of what we can do for users. So what happens is, as the AI is understanding that you're getting more capable, or you can even ask it, I want to do this. It can then adapt to you. It can start unlocking feature sets and taking you through in-context learning journeys of how to use those feature sets. And I think this could end up being a new frontier in software, a new way of building software. So like my thing is about modeling databases, and typically people just build a table and then they'd add in like an address on the table. My thing will say, usually the address is an inner object. You want to move this as an inner object, and then say, what does that mean? And you can start to understand a little bit about how you structure data. And I want to get people that they could graduate data modeling 101. But that's because the AI is prompting, right? It's not like I've invented a set of different UX journeys. I think it'll become organic and a bit more emergent in terms of how people experience the usage of the tool.
I really like that, because indeed, like you said, what Alan was talking about, I just remembered the book. The book is about face, and about face is indeed three different kind of interfaces. And what the badass book is about is really about, okay, let's gradually move from one place to another. And that's a very nice example where you say, and actually using AI and other kind of modern ways to move from one place to the other. And at the same time, I would say, and that's what I like so much about it, at the same time, you're also kind of teaching your user on the next steps to learn, because that's indeed when we are new. What's the next step? I'm developing something. something, I'm learning something, and okay, we could have a coach or we could have things, and if we can have software that can coach us becoming better, and hey, this is, you seem to struggle with this, that's I think this is where we will see in the next couple of years a lot more tools. That's okay, you're doing one thing, and maybe you're okay with just doing that one thing, and that's fine, but maybe you want to learn. Well, I can help you learn. And what I see, I think you gave a really good example of the picture. Okay, there is some kind of default rule with pictures that we want to learn. We see that your picture is not really good. Is it something you want to learn? Maybe you do it on purpose because you're a very good photographer and you want to do something very strange. But in most cases, like probably 95% of oh, and my camera just went off.
Oh yeah.
Let me first fix that. I think I know.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, you're back.
Yes, my camera is back and now I'm back. So I wanted to, what I was saying is that, what I was saying, I don't remember anymore. Yeah, so we're kind of teaching our users to learn, and what are the things that we're learning. I really like that, because that's, I think this is the next step. Before, software was helping us to become better, but we kind of needed a big manual to learn about all kind of things. And now what you're saying is that our software, or at least the software that you're wanting to write or that you're writing, is helping teachers to learn to do the next step, and that we can actually learn. And I think, yeah, if you just see how small children are using tablets, they figure out very quickly swiping and everything, and but that's limited. And then we can create apps that you can do much more, but gradually we add stuff to that.
Yes.
And of course, part of it is that when it was originally created, it was a very simple interface, and that these apps were improving, and at the same time their users were learning about it. But now I think for the next generation we need to do it similar. We started and we kind of build with users. That's what I'm hearing you talk about.
I think that's the summary, Eve. Yeah, it's just like it's conversational. It's a conversational experience with the customer. That's got context and evolves. Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. So I understand what you say about a book. That I see. I ask a book, but I've been thinking about it. I should really say about, okay, what is an extra resource that taught you something new? And indeed, this is from a book, but I think in the future it might be a podcast or other kind of things. And some people have indeed said, I don't want to talk about a book or a podcast or maybe an AI that taught me something. I think this is the kind of thing that you took back from a book, but you made it broader as well from what you're learning from it, and how you're applying it. So thank you for going in that kind of thing.
Yeah, no problem.
I want to move to that. Well, for me, one of the most interesting questions is that, what's a question that you think I should also ask you?
Yeah, I guess two questions maybe that are related. I think it's an important, like, how do you switch off, right? So I think programming problems tend to follow you around. You know, once you get something into your head, it can buzz around quite a bit. I think that would be a good question to ask. And I think maybe a bit related, how do you celebrate? Because that thing about like continuous small wins with the team, how do you get that sort of sense of celebration? You know, like agile is so many continuous this, continuous that. So there's continuous discovery, continuous delivery, continuous integration. Where's the continuous celebration, right? Where's the donuts? You know, where are the high fives? I think
it's really important to stress that out, because what I see in a lot of teams is we continuously do and we continuously improve, but somehow we don't see that much celebration. If you did a large project after 6 months or whatever, okay, we focus and then we get our big achievement, we release, and then big party.
Yeah.
And now we're releasing every 2 weeks if we're lucky, or if you do the Amazon way, every 10 seconds, every multiple times a second. And okay,
Yeah,
when do you celebrate?
exactly. Yeah,
Well, we can't celebrate every second, or that would be kind of dangerous, I would say. Or well, maybe the dopamine rush would work in a different way. But still, we need to take some time to say, okay, where are we celebrating? I really like that kind of question.
yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you see that with a team?
I mean, like, I just high five people all the time, because I just every like, getting something to deploy to production, even if it's just a blank page, big deal, high five. Getting the login button presented, high five. Yeah, getting a data transformation done, good job. Uh, just give people the positive feedback, because I guess it's like this. I'm not looking for one big achievement. I'm looking for this continuous.
All continues. I really like, especially when you said about deploying an empty page. People think, yeah, it's nothing business wise. It is indeed nothing. But these days, getting there, I've seen so many companies who struggle to be able to release something, and it sometimes takes months to just have that first release out. You're talking about the cloud before, about things. Sometimes things getting so much complicated that we don't realize that if you start a new project and being able to build and release something very empty, and then maybe, okay, you want to change it, I'll change one line of code, and now instead of a white empty page, it's a red empty page. I push a button and it's deployed again, or it's automatically deployed, or whatever. It feels nothing, but it's so important that we get there, that we get the basics going, in a sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's that compounding thing, Eve, right? That if you realize what you're involved is a compounding activity, then every bit is as important as the previous bit. And then you just got to acknowledge that, and have something to celebrate as often as possible. And even if it's donuts or virtual donuts or just a high five or just a thumbs up, I think it really helps the mood of the team. Unless you're involved with a whole lot of cynics, but I've never found a team where everyone's a cynic. You just can't produce anything if that's the case.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with how serious we are. If we give a sincere high five, I've seen. Okay, let me see how I could put it, because I don't want to make sure that it's clear for who and what company it was. But I've seen a place where um, we had a team, and 5 minutes before the review, somebody broke everything, and basically nothing was working anymore. So we canceled the demo, we canceled everything, and we went into the retro. And there was a project manager that usually came around and high five people and had a lot of good things. But I had already the feeling he had totally no idea what we done, and because he sometimes said things that was like, yeah, you're kind of fakey. But okay, and here he is. He didn't see the review because there was no review. He didn't even realize that that everything was broken. And he enters into the retro, kind of high fives everybody. Ah, great job, or whatever. And then pops out in less than a minute, and everybody was looking at each other. That okay, and that was the moment that that team realized that that person was completely fake, and that
Yeah,
everything he totally didn't understand what was going on. He totally didn't follow up that they. It was already bad in his position that he never showed up in the review, or hardly showed up. But there it became very clear that yeah, yeah, and people totally didn't trust him anymore.
yeah,
Um, and that's the kind of thing. If you high five, make it very specific, make it clear about what it is, not fakey, whatever. And if it's bad, we should also say, okay, it's bad. Maybe we learned something. We can high five what we learned, but at least don't celebrate a big thing or make a big thing out of something that exploded or was nothing. We can celebrate the lesson, but not yeah. We
yeah,
shouldn't say everything was great when the record just exploded. Okay, we can
yeah, yeah.
that we learned something, and that maybe it was a goal to see if we can make it explode. Okay, then it's a success. But everything in between there is it's a. And I think that's what you're talking about, or at least that's how it felt to me. That if you have cynics, most people skeptic or sarcastic, whatever, when they feel that it's not general, when we high five things that are really fake, if you're really sincerely happy about, okay, we were able to deploy, it's not about that it's empty or what's on the page, but we're happy about that journey to get there. We're happy about that next step,
Yeah.
I think then people can really celebrate.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and the last Kanban board that I helped the team build, from we didn't go from doing into done. We had a share with team column, so the cards were dragged into share with team, and we started there at every at the beginning of every stand up, and people got to share with the team the good outcome that they had made the day before. So then there was continuous celebration. I mean, it wasn't massive applause or whatever, but you got to have a really clear chance to explain something back to the team. Yeah, but I think the overarching recommendation for the whole thing is never be fake, right? If you don't like celebration, then don't try to fake it because you think it's on a tick box somewhere. Yeah.
But that's really, indeed, we shouldn't force people to celebrate. If you want to be whatever mood you have, we shouldn't fake. I think that's indeed even more important. Let's not be fake. I heard people saying emotions don't belong in companies. I disagree. Emotions belong, both good and bad, but we shouldn't let emotions take over. If I'm in a bad mood, I shouldn't be start shouting to people. But it's probably much safer if I say to people, "Well, today I'm in a bad mood for whatever," and if I feel safe enough, I might share why I'm in a bad mood. I don't need to be forced to do that, but if it's okay, I will still do that. But if I would not talk about it, I would be fake happy, and then all of a sudden I would start shouting at people, and people would really completely don't understand anything.
Yeah, that's super essential as well. Yeah.
It's so thank you for bringing that nuance on. Yeah, the non-fake thing. I think that's really is that important. Okay, I want to move to that last question. We've been talking almost for 2 hours now. I'm not sure when we exactly started, so it's about that. So who do you think I should ask next? And I think you had a list of a few people that you wanted to bring in.
Yeah. I've been lucky to be involved with amazing mentors, right? More than I could list on here, just incredible people. And this is such a joy to be in this line of work, right? You just meet people who are passionate and intelligent. And so I've narrowed it down to 3, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, the first one is Dan Bodart Worthington.
Let me bring him on screen. I think I have Daniel here. That's him, I think.
That's him. He is he's in London. I've worked with him on and off since maybe 2014 or 2015. So Dan is special, right? He his clarity of thinking is really next level, right? So I might be thinking about a problem for a week and get it to a certain level of clarity. You talk to Dan for an hour and it's gone to an absolute polished diamond. It's just weird how quickly he can pick up what you're getting at and then take it to its ultimate refinement.
Wow.
He's ex-ThoughtWorks. He is steeped in agile, and just things get better when Dan's in the room. So I think you'd have an amazing chat with him. And a bit like Rob, I'd be super interested in seeing how he responds to these questions. The second one is Roy Lyons.
Let me bring him on screen as well. I think that's him. Am I correct?
That's Roy. That's Roy. Yeah. Again, I think you'd have an amazing chat with Roy. That could go on all day. Roy is he's many things. At the minute, he's invested himself quite a bit in Web3 and crypto. But he's also an amazing team builder, and his take on how you develop software, how you operate it in production. When he explained it to me a few years back, like I was on a plateau, and Roy took me out of that plateau to the next level. How he thinks about continuous delivery is, I haven't heard it actually. The way he communicates it, I've not heard it from anyone else. And I've asked him to try to publish it a little bit. He says, he's interested in executing. But I think you'd have a stunning conversation with him. all of these people.
I want to go. Wait, I want to go a little bit into that, because what I've seen the last years is that so many people have good ideas that are less interested in publishing. I think also because I've seen some how would I call it, frameworks stealing ideas and using other kinds of ideas, and the people who were invented like today is much more in the agile world that are less interested in sharing with the world. Is that something you see as well, or is that just me that see that kind of thing?
No, I am seeing that, because this is why I'm calling these guys out, because they all have amazing stuff to offer, and they're not broadcasting it. You know, and it's not a slight on them. They're interested in executing in what they're doing, and they're learning, and they're sharing it with the people around them completely generously. They're hiding nothing. I guess they just don't see themselves as bloggers or vloggers or information radio.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing I wanted to move to. Yeah, and you bring it so nice. People are these days, the more inventive people are even more interested in executing than in promoting themselves. And so, okay, and a lot of them see it in a way like, okay, I'm just doing it, and yeah, for whatever reason, I'm doing good. Like you probably don't see many bloggers about fishers or whatever. It's like, no,
Yeah.
we're just executing teams, and we're good at doing these kind of things, and we're not always promoting ourselves as with all these creative ideas. And it's a little bit part of why, it's one of the parts why I'm doing indeed this series, that we
Yes.
can learn as a whole community about all these kind of things.
Absolutely. No, it's a wonderful thing you're doing. And I watched two of your interviews even. It's going, hang on a minute. If I keep watching these, I'm going to anchor my own answers closer to what these people are saying. So I've stopped myself watching them. I'm going to binge on them now that I've done my own bit. Yeah, so that, you know, I think it's wonderful that you're exposing people like the ones I'm mentioning.
Thanks. And that, yeah, you kind of, it's a little bit what I intend to do, is bringing out people. And I've said it before, it's interesting to interview the big names, and everybody's interested about the Lisa Atkins and the Alistair Coburns. But for me, it's also as interesting to talk with people who are less known, who make, and again, I have my camera switching off. I'll do it immediately. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Bring up more people and doing that kind of.
Yeah, it's really good.
While I'm going for turning on my camera, what's the next person you wanted to talk about?
So the next person is Garrett Conity. Garrett's based in the US.
That's him, I think.
That's him. Yeah, I haven't seen the guy in a long time, but I've got amazing memories. It was when that startup that we were doing that went to the US. Garrett was the CTO for that, and he was the one that took me to the US. And we had a real strong friendship, and he changed me as a person and changed me as a developer. He's very courageous. He's fearless, and his whole thing is like, you know, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And he gave me a lot of courage to try and express myself, and not sort of be, you know, a sort of a quiet member of a team, in a super positive way. He's very skillful at that. I don't know where his journey has gone for the last while, but this is why I'd be super interested to see, you know, how he answers these questions, because his DNA and his instinct and his whole being is agile. Yeah, he'd be a great.
From what I understand, you've been with him before the Agile Manifesto was created.
Yeah, 99, 2000, 2001. Yeah.
So it was at the start, and a lot of agile ideas already were there, and a lot of us were experimenting with it. But before there was the big boom of agile, let's put it like that. And so that's that could bring to see where he moved on. That might be really interesting. So
very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I remember he did some very innovative things with us. And it just came out of it spontaneously from him. So yeah, I'd love to. I haven't spoken to him in like more than 10 years, so I'd like to see where he's at.
That is, well, let's hope he answers yes and wants to join in. We'll see about that. Okay, thank you very much for your time. If people want to connect with you, what could be a good way to reach out to you?
Well, I'm on Twitter as Mike Hogan _. Somebody got there before me, so I had to stick on an underscore. I think I'm Mike -Hogan on GitHub. and I'm Mike Hogan on LinkedIn.
And the
any of
LinkedIn,
those
I'm
ways.
going to have
That's
that.
it, yeah.
I didn't prepare Twitter because, well, these days I have no idea where Twitter is going.
Mhm.
And to be honest, this morning I didn't think about GitHub. Usually I try to think about it and look it up if people are there. But this morning, it's a Sunday morning, like I said before, so I didn't think about preparing that one, which is
Of course.
actually these days with developers is actually a very good way to link. But I'll definitely add it in the show notes if people want to reach out. I want to thank you for your time because it's a wonderful conversation. I think we went all over the place in all kinds of directions. I learned a lot about you, about also about software, just thinking in general. I hope it inspires a lot of people. And for me, there's only one thing to say: thank you. It's been a wonderful time.
Well, Eve, I want to say thank you as well for doing this in general and for asking me specifically on you and Rob. And I found it challenging and stimulating and really enjoyable conversation. So yeah, thank you.
It's like I said, the pleasure is all mine, and that's what I hope, and I think many people have said it also, people on the show, but also others, that it should feel like really a conversation where we meet each other in the bar and I follow the session of you or something different. You were at the table in a session in a conference, and then in the end of the evening we chat and we learn some more. Of course, it is scripted and it's totally not scripted. We have these 10 questions where people can think up front, but I want to ask a lot more. And this is why it sometimes takes 2 hours. But I think it's, for me, that's the time it needs. You talked about making connections earlier on. We need to make connections when we physically meet. And that's the kind of thing where I hope to show people that it's different remote, but it can be done. It's not that easy, but we need to take time. This is also why, and I know some people think it's bad on YouTube to have it 2 hours, but that's what I think it needs to take for getting to know people.
I agree.
So that's what I hope it's, that people enjoy it. And at least I know there are some people who really are watching everything until the end and really tell me that they learned a lot. So I know that I've learned a lot from you. So thank you for sharing that time.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.